Merry Christmas to those who celebrate it. It's Christmas Eve, so as is tradition, my Christmas gift to you is this very special Christmas, special. I'll leave a link to the playlist somewhere, in case you want to binge them all. Now, this is the third one I do, and they've been pretty light on the factual so far, which was kind of the point. But I wouldn't mind going slightly more educational in the future. Like maybe a run-through of the history of Christmas, or of certain Yuletide rituals, or stuff like that. Would you be interested in that, or do you prefer if I stick to whatever this is for the Christmas specials? Let me know down below. Anyway, on to tonight's programming. Hello there, I'm Judith, welcome to my channel. Happy holidays of all kinds. This year's Christmas special is probably the nerdiest one so far, because this year it's all about D&D. It was a matter of time, let's be honest. So you may think that I wrote a Christmas one-shot, but no, don't worry, that's not it. I mean, I did write a Christmas one-shot, but that's not what this video is about. Instead, I want to do a Christmas edition of one of the series that I have going on. You may or may not remember that one series where I tried to make characters from pop culture in Dungeons and Dragons. So I thought it might be fun to try and make a character sheet for Santa Claus himself. So that's what I did. Let's start with the basics, race and class. Now, Santa's race is actually surprisingly open-ended. Like, for the first time in this series, we have a character that could really be a plethora of different races. Like, he looks human, but considering the beard and his tendency to tinker, it would make perfect sense to me to make the guy a dwarf or even a gnome. And they call him an elf as well, so there is a case to be made for making him an elf. But I did none of that. Not sure why, because I usually try to stick to the core player's handbook. Oh well. So instead of any of that, I decided to make jolly old Santa an Aasimar. Aasimar are essentially angels, which to me fits perfectly with the history of his character. You may or may not know that Santa Claus is very closely linked to the Christian Saint Nicholas of Myra, who used this strong Christian belief to do miracles. So it feels like it makes sense to make him the race that is essentially the D&D equivalent of holiness incarnated. Now, following that logic, you may expect me to make him a cleric, or even a paladin. But no. Paladins are fueled by their oath, so in this case you could say that his oath is that of bringing gifts. But mechanically speaking, paladins are very much focused on martial abilities, which doesn't really fit the Santa that I'm trying to make. Cleric would be a great class for Saint Nicholas of Myra, but that's not actually who I'm making. I'm making Santa Claus, who does have that religious origin, but these days he's more of a toy maker. You can probably see where I'm going with this. Yeah, Santa is an artificer, a level 20 artificer. I mean, he's been around for ages, and he's clearly a powerful entity. So I don't think I can not make him level 20. So that means I definitely have to give him a subclass. Unfortunately, there's no toy maker subclass, and the existing ones aren't super well suited for someone like Santa Claus. I mean, he's definitely not an alchemist, and the others are a little too martially for him. Out of the three options, I think Battlesmith is probably the best for him. Just applied without the battle, I suppose. That also means an awful lot of infusions. Seriously, it's a lot. I had to choose 12 infusions. And the problem with that is that Santa is not exactly combat focused, and D&D is. Which means that there's a bunch of infusions specifically made for fighting that just aren't very suitable for a jolly guy like Santa Claus. Firstly, I picked the Homunculus Servant, which is not something Santa usually has, but it's jolly useful. I suppose it could be like a Nutcracker Soldier or something. There's a lot of replicate magic items, because that's by far the most useful to someone like Santa. A bunch of them are like outfit upgrades or just useful stuff, like the belt of hill giant strength, the hat of disguise, because why not, the cloak of protection, the rope of climbing, and of course the bag of holding. And the rest are basically just toys that he can make. Like, I imagine the repeating shot to be some kind of nerve gun. Or the night goggles that are literally just those crappy spy gear night goggles. Or the enhanced arcane focus could be a literal toy wand, or even a candy cane. But wait, there's more. Why did I make him level 20? Anyway, apparently battlesmiths also get a steel defender, which is annoyingly similar to the homunculus servant, so I kinda consider them to be the same. So I guess this is also a nutcracker soldier, except when he's actually in soldiering mode, I guess. There's also times where I could give him either an ability score improvement or a feat. So he has the healer feat, because that seems to fit Santa pretty well, and the durable feat, because he's been around for ages. Dude's durable. I also gave him the Magic Initiate feat, Wizard Edition. That allows him to learn 3 spells from the Wizard's spell list, that Santa probably learned from his friend the Winter Warlock, who in D&D terms is probably more of a wizard. And none of the other feats really apply to Santa, so the others are just ability score improvements. But that brings me to the spells, because he's a level 20 artificer, so he can cast a couple of spells. The cantrips are just useful spells that kinda come with the artificer realm, like Mage Hand or Message. But there's also Frostbite, which is like an icy attack spell, which seems like a thing Santa could probably do. Other than that, there's a couple of healing spells, and also some spells that to me he gets from just his status of being Santa, like Heroism or Sanctuary. There's more, but they're higher level spells, so you may not recognize them anyway. I know I didn't. And I prefer not to bore you to death with listing them all, because for some reason I made him level 20. I also gave him the Fly spell, which isn't traditionally a thing he can do, but he has flying reindeers, so I imagine he could just fly if he wanted to. There's also Revivify, which again goes back to Nicholas of Myra. According to some of the stories, Nicholas actually revived some children, so I feel like he just needs to have this spell. Next up is Fire Shield, which feels a little too flashy for what Santa usually does, but I do think it fits him well, because this gives you resistance to either fire damage or cold damage, depending on the situation. Both of which would be very useful to someone who goes around through wintry nights, dropping down through chimneys. Last but not least, animate objects. Let's be honest, that's just a very Santa thing to do. Now let's look at his ability scores. Now the thing about this is that I could justify a great score for pretty much all of them. I mean, Santa Claus is an artificer who's been around for a long time and is generally well loved. So there's really only one option for his dump stat, and that's strength, and even that is debatable. But I did it anyway. Other than that, I kinda just went counting down by which ability might be more or less important to him. Which is kinda how that works anyway. So for an artificer, I think intelligence and dexterity are probably the most important, followed by wisdom and constitution, and finally charisma and strength. I'm gonna skip the description tab, because everyone knows what Santa Claus looks like. The only thing I filled in is his alignment, which I think is neutral good. You could say lawful because he has his lists, but he does seem to make those on a case-to-case basis. And the Santa I know would not hesitate to diverge from the lists. Anyway, equipment. So obviously he has the regular equipment, like rope, potions of healing, etc. There's also a flute, because I can imagine Santa Claus playing the flute. That's literally the only reason. I also added a sled, because if you can give Santa Claus a sled, you give Santa Claus a sled. But there's also a bunch of magic items, several of which are the infusions that he can make. So obviously there's his huge bag of holding, and the goggles of night. There's 2 items that are downright combat oriented. He's got something that I called a candy cane, which is actually a +2 magical grade club. I just think for Santa it would be a giant candy cane. He also has some adamantine scale mail, which I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea how to flavor in a Christmassy way. My best attempt would be that it's not so much a piece of armor, but the thickness of his coat. Of course, it also gives him disadvantage on stealth, which I imagine to be just a row of jingling bells on his belt or something. That leaves the crystal ball, the dust of disappearance, the helm of comprehend languages, and the restorative ointment. The crystal ball is literally just the crystal ball that Santa got from the Winter Warlock, which allows him to check on the kids he's judging. Restorative ointment is just a super useful thing to have on you in general, because it gives a bunch of hit points and cures diseases and poisons. Dust of disappearance is kinda like that anime ninja dust, because it turns you invisible. I think Santa would use this to not get caught by kids who can't sleep. The helm of comprehend languages is pretty self-explanatory. It's a helm, or in this case a hat, that allows a wearer to cast comprehend languages at will. Because Santa wants to make all kids happy. So if that means talking to them, he's gonna talk to them. But I think that's about all I can say about his character sheet. If you want to have a look at it, and maybe even play him, I'll put a link below so you can download it. You should probably ask your DM if that's okay though. But yeah, time for the YouTube thing. You know the drill. Everything you can do to help the channel is in the end screen right here. If you don't know what to comment, how about this? What do you think of my interpretation? Do you agree, or are there things that you would have done differently? And what other characters would you like me to make? Let me know all of that down below. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. See you next year, peeps.